about to leave, already packing, come with me, I'm not really asking.
Hi, I'm Vicky, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how I upcycled this piece of oak furniture to make it look like this. Gave it a brand new lease of life. So I'm going to be sharing with you tips on how to paint oak furniture like this, how to get a really nice finish on it, and how to use stencils on there too. So hopefully you can pick up some good tips for brightening up your own furniture in your home. So I started off by taking off the drawer handles. Now, luckily, I wasn't sure obviously what would be underneath here, but luckily the damage was not too bad. I was concerned that there might be, you know, like really big deep grooves where those chunky handles have been, but luckily they came off really easily and the holes were really easy to fill. So in theory, I should have used wood filler to fill those, but I just had some bog standard wall poly filler in the house. So I just used that and that has worked absolutely fine. So after filling the holes and letting that dry, it was time to sand it. I decided to do this outside because obviously I thought, oh, that's going to create a lot of dust, and wow, it did create a lot of dust. So pick a day that is relatively nice weather, and I really, really recommend you do the sanding part outside because it is very, very dusty. So I used a relatively fine sandpaper here. I believe it was about 120 or 150. I'm not actually sure what the number on sandpaper refers to. It's to do with like how rough and gritty it is basically. So this was a relatively fine one. I would say that anything like 80 would probably be too rough for the furniture. What you're trying to do is take off any wax, varnish, finishing that's been put on top. So it's really, really important to get rid of the just top coat that will have been put on your furniture. Like pretty much any furniture that you would buy will have some kind of finish on the wood to protect the wood, to keep it looking nice. It wasn't too bad getting it off. It was just kind of time consuming, I have to say. So once I'd sanded it all down, I then wiped it down with a damp cloth to get rid of the dust. This is really, really important to clean the surface. So this was a cloth that was just damp with water. Wiped it all down with that first, literally every single inch of it. And I was like really, really careful to make sure that I thoroughly cleaned it. And after cleaning it with some water, I then went on to clean it with some white spirit. Now, I couldn't get actual white spirit from the DIY shops, but I found this like sort of replacement non-toxic stuff in Wicks. So that was just as good basically. Well, it promised to be on the bottle. White spirit ideally to clean the wood, but if you can't find any, find like the nearest alternative. So I've got a paper towel and I'm just rubbing all over the wood with this cleaner, and this just sort of finishes off the cleaning of the wood to get it ready for the first coat of paint to go on. So for the primer, I used this Dulux Trade wood primer. And that Farrow and Ball paint there is what the colour is going to be on the top. So it's always a good idea to prime first. I kind of wish with this that I had researched pairings of primers and paint, like the coloured paint that goes on top, just because this is an oil-based primer here, and the colour that went on top was water-based. And the problem was that even after the primer had dried, I feel like the paint didn't really do so well on top of this primer, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. So just really research before you pick a primer, and maybe ask someone at the DIY shop where you're buying it from, is this the best primer to go with this paint that I'm ultimately going to use? Now, obviously it worked out fine for me in the end, but it's just a really good idea to do your research before you put on the first lick of paint, because it is quite a time consuming job. I think this took me around about in total 3 days, doing the odd hour here and there, because obviously I had to paint, wait for things to dry, paint, wait for things to dry. So yeah, it's time consuming. So make sure that your tools are absolutely right. So this is the primer layer going on here. As you can see, it goes on quite thin. You can still very much see the colour of the original wood underneath. That's absolutely fine. That's totally normal for the primer to go on like that. This primer really is just to help the new paint adhere to the wood, basically. This is getting it ready for the new paint to go on and making sure that it will stick and hold. So it's not, you don't need to worry if the colour of the wood is showing through the paint. Just putting a little layer on the inside of the drawers here as well. I think what I might ultimately do is line these drawers with like some cool paper, like get a like patterned piece of wrapping paper, maybe with floral pattern or something, and just line the base of the drawer. But I haven't really completely decided yet. I'm going to wait and see. For now, I'm just assuming that it needs to be painted. So the day after I sanded and put the primer on, it was then time to paint with the colour. So this is a Farrow and Ball paint, and the colour is called Peg Noir, I think, Peg Noir. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, so I sincerely apologise. I had to move to the garage because it was raining on this day, which was a bit of a pain, but I didn't let that stop me. So I put the unit in the garage to paint it, and then I just picked up where I left off. Now that the primer was dry, I could put on the colour. So unfortunately, and this is what I was saying earlier about the primer and the colour not maybe working together so well. I don't know if you can see in the right hand corner there, but the paint has gone streaky and it's not quite adhering to the surface very well. Now, I don't know if this is because the primer wasn't perfect for this particular type of paint. So it's a water-based paint, wood paint, or whether it's because I should have lightly sanded the primer after the primer had dried. So, you know, I've never done anything like this before, and I had read up on it, but I think you read sort of different tutorials and they give you different ideas. So I really suggest that if you want to do this yourself, when you go to the DIY shop to pick up the paint, just ask advice about the combinations of products and what stages they think you should go through. Now, ultimately the streak went away, so this did work for me. I went over it a couple of times, so it had a couple of coats on, and the finish was absolutely fine. But obviously I was a bit nervous for a while that I had completely stuffed up the job. So just do your research first, and then you can save yourself any headaches. So this colour is kind of like a greyish pink. In certain lights it looks a lot more pink. It's very unusual. I absolutely love it. I wanted this piece of furniture to be grey, but I didn't want it to be like a miserable grey, if that makes sense. So this colour worked really well. I love it. It's not too pale. It's still quite interesting. So I'm really pleased with the actual shade. That I wanted to do some stenciling on the drawers just to give it a little cool feature, make it look a bit different and put my own unique stamp on it. But I had a bit of a fail the first time I tried this. So this was my trial run of doing the stencil. I thought, hey, I'll just stick it down and then just paint over it and it will be fine. And it wasn't, and you're gonna see why in a minute. So with the stencil, first of all, I stuck it down to the drawer, tried to line it up as best I could in the position where I wanted it to be. I've used frog tape here, and this is delicate surface frog tape. I'd given the paint a chance to dry overnight, but obviously the paint could still be a bit delicate. So using a more delicate masking tape just meant that I wasn't too worried about the paint coming off. So I bought a little tester pot of some Farrow and Ball white paint in order to do the stencil. I just wanted it to be really subtle, and I thought this white would still show through on the grey undercoat, on the grey colour, but there'd still be a big contrast, but it wouldn't be like too bold. So I wanted it to be a little bit subtle. So this was my first attempt, and you'll see what I did wrong in a minute. I literally just got the brush, got a load of paint on and went, woo, just paint across the whole stencil, it'll be fine. And if you are a crafty person, then you will know exactly what happens next. I lifted off the stencil and voila, it had all just bled out from the outline of the stencil. So let this be a lesson to you. When you are stenciling on wood, furniture, walls, whatever, look at it. It's just totally bled out around the edges. You really need to think about how you're going to seal up the edges of that stencil so that the paint doesn't bleed under. So I was kind of disappointed with that, but that's okay. I went back to the drawing board and I started again. I painted over it. Now, what I did this time, and this worked, was I put the stencil back on and then I painted over the stencil with a brush with the original colour. So that nice Farrow grey pink colour that I'm painting the whole unit. And then I left that to dry, okay? And then after that had dried, with the stencil still on, I got a smaller, sort of more delicate art brush, dipped it in the paint, and then I dabbed it on a piece of paper until there was almost like barely any paint left. So I dabbed out the excess right down. So as you can see, hardly any paint left on that. And then I just gently dabbed it on. And what's happened is, by doing that layer of the original colour that's underneath, I have sealed up the edges of the stencil so that that white now isn't going to bleed underneath the stencil. Now, I've done some research online. If you can't do it this way because you don't have the original colour of the surface that you're painting with the stencil, you can get something called Mod Podge, I think it's called, Mod Podge. And it's basically just a clear crafting glue substance that you can use, and you can use that in exactly the same way as I've done with the original colour paint. You paint over the stencil, leave it to dry, and then you can go nuts with your stencil colour. So Mod Podge, I'll link it below. You can buy it from Amazon. It is not expensive. This stencil, by the way, was from Not on the High Street, and the lady who designs these had a ton of different ones, but I just really love this one. I just thought this one was really pretty. And as you can see, as now it's time for the big reveal, that has worked so much better. I mean, like, the difference between the original attempt and this attempt. So you can actually see clearly defined, all of the petals are properly, clearly defined. It just looks so much better. So guys, that is it. That is the finished console table. The only thing that's left now to do is to add some new drawer handles. So I can still open these drawers. You can just sort of push them from underneath, but I am going to be adding some new drawer handles at some point. I think I'm going to add some black ones, and all I'll need to do is drill a single hole in the middle. They're going to be a lot smaller than those original drawer handles were, but I mean, to be honest, for now, I'm just really enjoying seeing it without drawer handles on. I just think that stenciling is so pretty, and the drawers are so small that we don't really use them to store anything anyway. I'm absolutely thrilled with the final results. I just love it. I can't stop staring at it. So I hope this has given you guys some inspiration and a few tips for upcycling your own pieces of furniture at home. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and I will see you on the next upload. Bye.